PJ,
Right.
episode 3.
Smashing them out.
We are doing the lonely chapter today. So I'm really excited about this one because this is sort of, when we met up and we started talking about doing these things, we sort of reconnected. This was one of those big things that sort of stands out to me as like one of your core reasons why you're even doing this.
100%.
The lonely chapter has been a big sort of thing for you. So I've experienced the same. I've been exposed to the same idea from the same people, but yeah, it really has deeply resonated with you. So this is going to sort of be the PJ show today.
Yeah, my favorite.
But can you walk us through what this lonely chapter thing is? Like, what is it, and how did you come across it?
Yep. So something that I kind of love, and I heard Chris Williamson say this. His name is going to come up so much in this podcast because he was a massive inspiration for me starting this as well. But he often gets critiqued for really relying on quotes and labeling things. But kind of a reason I love doing that is because it condenses down a whole idea into it's like a Windows zip folder. It just keeps a whole idea contained in this one little thing. And when I heard this label of the lonely chapter, it just fucking made so much past experience make sense to me. So the lonely chapter, for people that don't know, is kind of this phase that you go through generally pretty early on in the process if you're going through this self-development process. And it's where you feel like you've started to outgrow parts of your life that don't serve or don't align with the life that you want to have, and specifically with relationships, right? So you might start to see that your circle of friends starts to shrink, maybe old connections start to just fade away. So you see things shrinking, and the struggle sort of comes in where you're doing all of these things that feel objectively better, right? You're doing these things that are supposed to make your life better, but you're losing so much. And you're not in the position where you're going to start gaining these new connections you want. Yeah. So you're doing all of this stuff that should be good, but it's in a way making your life worse in a sense.
I view it like a valley.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And I'm going to get to that later, why it really connected with me, because it's that looking at it as a valley that is going to lead to an upside eventually. But in the moment, it just feels like shit. You feel like you're in this. It's not obvious that there's an end point to this. The whole premise of this is going to come back to just looking at it as a part in the process. That was the realization. But that's the sort of rough definition of it. And when I heard that label attached to it, it was like, I don't know, the way I sort of picture it is like I had this massive pile of bricks that were really messily stacked on top of each other, right? And I heard that concept and it like shook it, and everything just fell into place and all the gaps were filled, and it just made this nice, neat thing. And it was like, holy fuck, that is exactly the experience that I went through.
My experience was somewhat similar in that I think it was, for me, it was a big source of comfort of like, this is awful. I'm doing all this work and I'm fighting myself every day, and I'm fighting life and my circumstances, and I'm fighting for these dreams that I have that feel like, what's the word? They're pointless, or they're so far out in the distance. I'm never going to reach these things, and I'm suffering for it. Yeah. And I'm suffering. And like, why am I doing this? And then having someone come along and be like, not only is this common, it's to be expected. Yeah. If you're going to choose, this is the path I'm going to walk on. This is what happens to virtually everyone. Yeah. It was like, oh, that helps. So that's a big source of comfort that this is like, okay, everyone goes through this. Especially like part of the cruelty of the lonely chapter is you're alone in it. And so you've only got your perspective. And so when you are sort of thrown into it without a exposure to the idea beforehand, you're sort of like, this sucks. Is anyone else going through this? Yeah. It's just nice to know, this is actually really common. Yeah. Yeah. before we dive too deep into your story, I find when I'm sort of hearing someone's story like this, I find spoilers really helpful. So to help frame the conversation, or at least help me sort of understand your journey a bit better, I think for me at least, maybe for listeners, it would help for me to know what's sort of your, do you have an end point, or do you have a next major milestone, a vision that you're shooting for? Like this, I've got clarity. This is what I'm going for now. What are you working towards?
A goal of mine has always been to, I guess like I call it, I want to achieve what I would call freedom, which is kind of multifaceted in the sense of I want financial freedom, but I want control of my own time. So, and that's been a goal of mine for forever. It's working for myself, if you're looking at it from a professional sense. And I want to do something that feels like it's serving some kind of a purpose. I know that a lot of people can hear that and it sounds sort of cringy, but I've always felt like I've been put, I think we all have a duty to sort of reach our maximum potential in whatever way that looks like. I often say that and think that it's not only something that applies to your professional work. I think your purpose could be just being the best, father you could be, or whatever it is. But I think we all have an obligation to fulfill a purpose that we were put here for. And so that's always been kind of my driving thing. It's like, am I working towards whatever that purpose is? And I feel like the past few years, it's sort of been like taking all of these drastic turns, but it's what we spoke about in the positioning episode of being directionally correct.
Yes.
It's easy to see that in hindsight, but at the time you sort of feel like you're stumbling around in the dark, not knowing what you're doing. But it's, I guess it's just aiming towards whatever that sort of purpose is.
So 2018 looks like it was a pretty big year for you.
That was it all kind of started changing.
So your end point now, you've got a lot more clarity of like, you want the individual freedom. I'm not hearing that you want the individual freedom to like selfishly do all the vain things you want to do. It's like you want the freedom to be able to build that purposeful thing, that engine, whatever it is for you. You want the freedom to be able to build that.
Yes, there is a selfish element to it as well.
Cool.
So I am the kind of person I am motivated by money. I feel like there's too much. I don't know if it's just a societal thing where as soon as people start talking about money being a motivating factor or ambition somehow being a bad thing, we always label people like that as bad people for some reason. But I am motivated by money and the freedoms that bring. But I think I'm not motivated purely by selfish things, or I don't go out of my way I don't view life as a zero-sum game where I see that my win has to equal your loss. I don't see things like that. I see it as, why can't both win? So there is a part of me that has that selfish motivation of, I want money. I want to be financially free. I want to have probably a little bit more money than what is required to be financially free. So there is the selfish element to it as well.
That'd be an interesting conversation one day. I'm fighting the urge to go off on a tangent. Like, money is a tool, and how you plan on like a hammer is a tool, and in one situation it can build a house. In another situation, it can bludgeon a family to death.
Yes.
Right. So the issue is not the tool; it's the application of it. 100%. So that might be a good conversation one day to go through motives of money, because I empathize with the desire to be financially free. But let's dive into your journey. So now we sort of have a rough idea of what PJ's endpoint is, what he's working towards, which is, again, for new people, that's what this whole podcast is about. Is we're sort of documenting our journey, because we're not anywhere close to where we need to be yet. Like, I look at people like Alex Hormozy, who's like 2 years older than me, and I feel like a complete bitch. Like honestly. But I have to stay in my own lane which has been a good, healthy thing for me to learn to do from someone who's always compared. Stay in my own lane and be like, you're running your own race. The question is, are you running it to the best of your ability? So that's a little bit of a segue. Tell us about 2018, because that was a big year for you. Sounds like a painful year.
Yeah, it was an interesting one. It's funny, doing the prep for this episode, it was the first time in a while, or probably ever, where I've sat down and looked at from then to now, and
that's an experience.
Sat back and and it's so fucking, it was a kind of a spin out, because I'll get into it, but it was just very interesting to look back at all of it. But yeah, 2018, I don't know if I can look back at it and say that it was exactly, it definitely wasn't objectively bad. So the first sort of major thing that I remember happening back then was I broke up with my first sort of, what I thought at the time was a serious girlfriend. We'd been together for a few years, and that was the first time I'd felt like I genuinely failed at something. So that happened, and that was shit. But
it depends how much you sort of want to share. But like, what about it was the failure for you? Do you blame yourself for it breaking down, or?
I did.
Okay.
I did. I don't now. Now looking back at it, I was 19 turning 20. So I was still a kid. Like,
yeah, you were.
I didn't really have a clear kind of understanding of what a relationship really was, or at least it was very different to what I see it as now. A good relationship. I think it was just a big hit to the ego. I think at that point, being a guy at that age, the testosterone's pumping, you're just super, that's where you're at your peak sort of competitive kind of, it was very easy to start comparing myself to other people at that point. Now looking back at it, I'm glad that it happened, because I think it was good to go through that experience, because you come through it and you're fine. So I think that kind of pain at that age is something that every dude has to experience. I think it's very valuable, or at least at some point in time.
Yeah. I agree. Like, painful situations are often some of our best teachers. And yet at the same time, there's part of me that's like, listen to podcasts like this, listen to older, wiser people than us, speaking to all young people, but like young men especially, and try to learn from past mistakes so you don't repeat them. But it's this weird thing of like, you gain so much from making mistakes. From the like, I've become much less judgmental and critical of people. I delineate between judging behavior. I think we as a society probably need to judge behavior a little bit more, because everyone's like, oh, I'm not judgmental. But the same people are like, I really don't like judgmental people. I'm like, that's a judgment.
Yeah.
But yeah, delineating between, I'm going to assess this behavior for whether it's good or bad, morally right or wrong, or good or bad for society or the individual or whatever, and judging, like condemning the individual, they're two very, very different things. But yeah, guys who go through suffering and make mistakes can often be less judgmental, more humble. But there's something, I think, sweet, and you see this in conservative Christian families. There's something sweet about people who grow up and they aren't exposed to those failures. They have happier families, happier children, there's more stability, they tend to do well professionally, and there's just a lot less drama and pain and baggage in their life. But there's also less, in some realms of life, there's also less perspective, because they haven't made the mistakes others have.
That was what I was going to ask off that. Does that experience make it harder to deal with problems when they come up later in life, because you haven't had that past experience?
I mean, in church circles, people, back in my time in church, which is another separate conversation, for some of them, they do exist in a sort of Christian bubble, which creates problems. I do see others who... There's a Bible verse that says, be in the world, not of the world. And I see these people who are thoroughly in the world and exposed to people in the world, but they hold firm. So they sort of get some of those perspectives and experiences secondhand, but they have the wisdom and the discipline to heed the advice of others before they repeat the same mistakes. And there is something sort of beautiful about that. We said it in, I think, the first podcast. Like, I don't need to be shot to know it would not be nice to be shot. So it doesn't validate the behavior. It's good to do these are the no regrets people. It's good to do the behavior to get the experience and then have no regrets. It's like, no, your actions have consequences.
Yeah, you choose your regrets.
They do. There are consequences. And just saying no regrets is just a band-aid so you feel better from things. But but it's still good to, if you do make those mistakes, to be able to look back and be like, I've suffered the consequences, this has sucked. But at the very least, you can learn and grow from it. There is something you can take from it that will push you further, which is, again, what has brought us to this conversation. So, yeah, you went through the breakup.
Went through that.
Yeah.
And then, so that was shit, but then all of this really good stuff started to happen as well. So that was the year that I graded for my black belt in Kempo, which was a huge milestone for me. That was massive. And I remember training for that. The physical side of it was one thing, but then there was a massive mental side to it as well. That was a huge thing for me at that time. And then probably the most significant step sort of in my professional career was getting my first full-time work in production. Got to work for someone who at that time was a massive inspiration. While I was working there, I definitely consider a major mentor, like a big sort of positive force in my life. And that happened very quickly. Like, got the offer. It's a very long story, but it kind of happened out of nowhere. Was supposed to go for a 2-week trial, was there for a week, got the job. So then I was like, okay, I'm out of home for the first time. Now I've got to try and find a place to live. So I'm going through all of that shit, still working at the time.
How old were you at this point? 20?
19.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So it was a few months before I turned 20. And it was weird because it was just chaos. There was the stress of doing all of this shit for the first time, but also positives. I was making more money than I think most 19-year-olds would be making.
Definitely more
at
than
the
what I was
time.
making, yeah.
So it was, I think when you look at it in terms of positive to negative, my life was probably objectively a lot better. It was just more intense because there was so much stuff going on.
Yeah.
So it was like I was just thrown into a washing machine and there was just so much shit going on and I couldn't find I couldn't clear my head in a way.
Is this where you began this lonely chapter, or has that come after?
It was definitely
when did
the
that hit
beginning.
you?
Yeah. Okay. So just before I moved is when I started I was just trying to figure shit out. So I was starting to read. I was listening to podcasts and getting into that self-development sort of space. At that point in time, it was very much Gary Vee was at the peak. It was the hustle culture and like just trying to purely focus on how do I figure my shit out from a professional stance, ignoring everything else.
What triggered the self-improvement element? Because you're in a new city, you're in Melbourne, and you grew up here in Sydney. You went to Melbourne, got a new job, you've gone through this breakup, which was like, how do I process these feelings and experiences I haven't had before? You got your black belt, but you're in Melbourne, you got this new job. From my perspective, it's not like moving to Melbourne is like, it's a brand new city, you don't know anyone. Like, yeah, that's lonely, that's rough. But you're also like in a company where I imagine there was like you were surrounded by people.
No, it was literally the guy I worked for, and I was their first hire.
Oh, okay.
And it was really, I was living about an hour away from the city in this smaller town. So it was like work was intense and busy. Then I'd go home and there was no one around in this town. Like, it was a very small place. So it was like work, home. I was trying to do my own thing, get some freelancing happening. I was making my own content on YouTube and stuff. But I had a lot of time in my own head. And at that age, I don't think that's where you want to...
That's what my question was going to be. Is that what drove you to the self-improvement? Like, as I'm sitting in hindsight, it may have been a good thing you went through that, but you're sitting and stewing on your own, probably coming up with more questions than you have answers for.
Yeah.
Is that what drove you to the self-improvement side?
Yeah.
Okay, so what questions can you recall? What were the big things? Because often it feels like a massive spider web of there's so many things in my head, but there's usually a handful of things that just keep coming up. So what were, if you can remember, what were some of the things that you kept coming back to that you needed answers for?
The biggest one was purpose. That was the biggest one.
What triggered that?
I don't know. I don't know what led to me asking that, but that was always the thing of, am I doing enough? Am I doing the right things? Like, for some reason, purpose was just the thing I kept coming back to. I don't know why or what triggered that. Maybe it was, I think part of it was, so for example, the guy that I worked for, he still runs a really successful YouTube channel. The guy's famous all over the world, makes heaps of money doing the thing that he loves, right? And openly has a pretty positive impact on the people that consume his content. Yeah. And I saw that, and I've always sort of attached to, I don't do this now, but I did this a lot when I was younger. I would sort of idolize people who were doing the thing. And I think because I saw so many people, social media, I think, massive reason for this, thinking about it. Seeing these people who are, from what it seems like, living the thing that they're passionate about. That's how they make their living. That's how they're having an impact. So maybe it was that kind of comparison that sort of made me think that way and keep asking those questions.
Was it that, like, something for me is I look at these people, again, through the lens of social media, right? And they seem to, this is why I'm grateful for Hormozy, because he sort of peels back the layer and he's like, no, hard work is hard. But it looks like, for a lot of these people, they're living their passion, and they wake up and they're like, I get to work again today.
They're never working. They're living their passion.
It's that, or the work that they do. They're like, I'm so excited, and I'm like, man. I'm not excited for part of that's a mindset thing for myself, but it's like, I'm not excited. It's hard right now. It's a lot. I just have to push my way through. But I found it hard where I'm like, how do I get to the point where I love this every day? Was that, I don't think I should love it every day now. That's helped.
Yeah.
But was that part of what it was like for you? Where you're seeing this guy, you're seeing other people just like thriving in their passion, and you're like, it doesn't feel like that for me, so what am I missing?
Before I worked there, yes, I had that very skewed view, but working there, I got to see the ugly side of...
That's helpful.
You know, it was, but I didn't recognize it at the time. Okay. That was a thing that I can look back on and see.
Quick question. Do you think seeing that guy, and you see the impact he has on this is something that bugs me, because this is probably the autistic part, that I like things to be true, whether it's black and white and it hurts. But do you think the persona he puts out there is fake, or is it genuine and there's just hard shit at the same time? Because I find that hard. I find that jarring. That's why I find it hard to make content, because I'm like, yeah, I'm having a week where I don't love fitness. Fitness fucking sucks sometimes.
Yeah.
But people are only going to like me if I say how fun fitness is all the time. It's not.
Yeah, it's not.
It's not.
This is a hard question for me to answer, because
I thought so.
This...
real shit.
Yeah. Look, a lot of people who... If you're at that age that I was at, or you're the type of person who tends to do what I did, idolize people... You need to be very conscious that a lot of these people making content out there and trying to connect with people, at the end of the day, they're playing a character, right?
I find that hard.
That's not always a bad thing, right? We all wear masks. Us doing this podcast right now, the way we're talking, everything I say, I mean, but the way I'm delivering it, it's not the way I would talk to my dad, for example, or my best mate.
If we were talking at a cafe.
Even if we turned the cameras off, this conversation, the dynamic, the mask would change. So you need to be conscious of that, and you need to realize that there are some people who, and I'm not saying the guy I worked for was doing this, but there are some people who are completely full of shit.
Yeah.
So you need to be conscious of that, and at least know that it's a possibility. So I think I got to see more of I got to sort of look behind the curtain, right, and see the real thing. And I guess in a way it sort of made me question things a little bit, but I don't think I was prepared for when I was trying to do my own thing, you have all of this shit you're going through, but there's none of the upside. It's like the guy I worked for, he still had a lot of the struggle, and the guy worked ridiculously hard and would go through some pretty shit periods, but the upsides outweighed that so much. Whereas when I was trying to do my own thing, there was none of that upside. Yeah. It was just,
it's just hard.
So yeah, I think it was just a bit jarring. And at that time, I didn't know this lonely chapter thing was a thing, right? I just looked at it and went, oh, fuck, he's doing something that I'm just not doing. I didn't realize it's a process. You can get there eventually if you work through it.
Yeah. So
interesting time, man.
Yeah. So it sounds like you felt a sense of loneliness at some point, or a sense of how to describe it, like, where am I? What am I doing? In my head, the way I sort of, because I like imagery, it's like I'm sort of floating in space where I'm like, which way's up, which way's down.
Yeah.
I'm going through the motions, what I have to do to survive, but I don't really know where I'm at, and no one around me seems to have answers. So it sounds like you went through that, you became aware of that experience, and then you discovered the concept of the lonely chapter. Can you walk me through that timeline? Like what that experience was, when did you really start to feel this weight? What precipitated that? How long did it last? And when did you come across this concept?
It lasted a long time. Probably from 18 through to maybe start of last year, maybe probably partway through 2023, I think, is when it started. I started to feel like I was coming out of that phase, but I hadn't learnt about the concept of it yet. So after I'd learnt what the concept was, and I heard it in that episode of Modern Wisdom with Alex Hormozy. I think he's the one who actually came up with the,
I think he was
the label.
Yes.
I'll link to if I can find like a video of him talking about it, because it was, I heard it and then looked back and I was like, holy fuck, all of that period makes complete sense now. That's what that was. And it lasted a long time, and it was shit. Like it's not like I felt completely alone and isolated and depressed. Like I had my family around. I still had a few mates that I keep in regular touch with, but I didn't feel like I had anyone that I really connected with on anything other than just past experience, just knowing them for a long time. Work, I think the easiest way to get out of that is the professional relationships, because professional value is the easiest one to build, I think, because there are skills you can learn. You can just get better at a thing. You're now more valuable in a professional sense.
And your profession is also the thing that you spend the bulk of your time doing.
Yep.
It's often where you derive a lot of meaning and purpose and things.
Yep.
And that's often where you're going to encounter a significant portion of your struggles.
Yes.
So when you have professional relationships and these other people are some of the few that get your struggles because they're in the same position, that deepens that bond. It's the same with like war buddies, right? And you look at sort of military personnel and the bonds that they have. And they'll say this, the stories throughout history of like fighting alongside someone does something to that's a really, really powerful bond that most people, at least in today's day and age, will never know.
It's the most extreme example of sharing a purpose with someone, right? You're on a mission together. And I think that's a big reason I get along with the people I work with so much, is because you work really hard at this common goal. And that's an important thing. So when I started to really see progress from a professional sense, when I started working at the company I work for now, it was like, holy shit, this stuff, it's all that work, all that shit, it started to pay off. And it's by no means an end goal, you know, but I can feel like it was worth it at that point. And then seeing things start to work in the professional sense was like, oh, okay, so now that's going to start improving in the social things, and then eventually the romantic side of things as well. So it's just getting through that sort of that phase, that lonely chapter, and realizing that you're gaining the tools and the skills from that too. It will improve everything else, but it's just, you got to get through it. You got to get through that part.
Yeah, that's what my experience was like. One day I'll go sort of through my story. Probably don't have time today for me to really go through my lonely chapter, because it is very, very different to yours, I think. But yeah, for me, a quick bit to share was, once I started to get much more clarity over what I wanted to shoot for in my life, I very quickly realized the vast majority of people around me are not on the same wavelength in terms of what I wanted to do. And so trying to explain to people, this is what I want to do, it just didn't make sense to a lot of people.
Speaking a different language.
Who actually gets it? Another version of that is, I had kids relatively early compared to my friendship group. I had my first kid when I was 24, intentionally, but I had them young. And one really jarring moment, two jarring moments, was my friendship group at the time. Like, we were doing one of our regular barbecues, and they were playing Cards Against Humanity, which I just don't like. I like a good dick and ball joke every now and then, if it's done like clever. It can be very, very funny. But half of the jokes, more than half the jokes in Cards Against Humanity is come. And it's just like, I hate the game, but especially when I had kids, it's just something in my brain clicked over. I'm like, what the hell are you guys doing? Like, this is... which can sound really like I was positioning myself above them, but it was just going through having like kids just changed how I looked at things. So I won't go into that too much, but that was a good example of, I experienced a bit of a lonely chapter with my social group, because I was like, I've got kids, you guys don't, and the way I see the world is so fundamentally different now because I have this creature that I'm responsible for, and you guys don't get that, which is fine, because I dove into the deep end in a lot of things when I was in my 20s. They just sort of did their 20s more normally. But it did create this big gap of understanding, which was lonely.
That was a real difficult thing to sort of try and navigate, because it's like, is this really what, you know, is this all you can get out of these connections now, or is there something more? And I think I was always looking for that as well, just more quality connections with people, which again comes back to what we spoke about in the last one about positioning, right? So yeah, a big thing was just, for me, I wanted to find purpose and direction, but I also wanted to just have really good connections in my life. And that was a big thing for me.
Quality over quantity.
Yes.
And when you are ambitious, it can be hard to find those people, especially going into business. Everyone wants to make money. And somewhat understandably, some people are just there to sort of make money. But there are many, many people in the world who will forsake genuineness for the deal and for the buck, which I can sort of understand. But that can be jarring when you're looking for the right people, sort of at the level you aspire to be, and it can be a bit of a pit filled with snakes, or like wolves in sheep's clothing, which is also tricky. So you feel somewhat even more lonely at that stage as well. It's the same with finding, you know, I've heard successful people sort of talk about this. When you are successful, attractive, men and women, it's like, how many of the people around you that are being your friend really care about you as a person, or care about what you and your status can provide them? How do you know? And that's a curse, I think, of being generally likable. So part of my story is, my experience has felt like, for a lot of my life, I've generally been unlikable. a story I'll go into another time because I think it's somewhat interesting. But that has sort of helped me where I feel like the friendships that I still have that are meaningful are genuine, because I've really, really pushed a lot of times without meaning to. This is probably the ASD part, but I've really, really pushed, like tested that person's limits, where I feel like if someone was just around for
they check it.
I also haven't had much benefit to provide people for most of my life. They'd be like, this is so not worth it. This guy's really hard. So the people that have hung around, I'm like, they're the good sort. So there is I have found comfort through my lonely chapter when people like Jordan Peterson talk about agreeableness, and he's like, people who are generally less agreeable, like society needs people like that, and we need people who will sort of rock the boat a bit, which isn't like, I've softened a lot, and I think I'm a lot easier to get along with these days, but I don't mind being extremely disagreeable if I have to, which is funny. Like, I don't like elements of my lonely chapter, but I genuinely prefer authenticity over none. So I went on a couple of dates with this woman. We're having some pretty frank conversations, and just sort of to test the waters. And people watching this would be like, "Why would you do that?" I was like, we were talking about a few controversial things. I said, "We haven't even talked about my big controversial views yet." And she's like, "On things like what?" And I'm like, "Abortion." Mm-hmm. And she's like, "Oh, okay, like, what do you mean with abortion?" I'm like, I'm very pro-life, even from like a non-religious perspective.
Yeah.
I think there are really good arguments for being pro-life. And I don't mind being disagreeable on this, because I find the vast majority of people I engage with on the subject of abortion
haven't thought it through.
They haven't thought it through, but if some of them have, but a lot of people just react emotionally. Yeah. They're like, "You're a man, you can't have an opinion." I'm like, well, that's sexism. And in any other realm, talking to these kinds of people, you would be against sexism. Yeah. But there's double standard for you to have it now. Yeah. Just because I'm a man doesn't mean I can't have a view on this if my view is rational. I digress. But it was sort of a bit of a test, because she was like, "Okay, what are your reasons for that?" And I went through like sort of my core rationality around why I hold the position that I have. And she did the usual, which is fair enough. Like, what about sexual assault? What about deformities? What about mum's life is in danger? Which are all fair questions. And we sort of went through some of those. And she was like, "I've never thought about it from that perspective before. That's I'm gonna think on that a bit more." And I was like, this seems like a good sort. Because for so many people, that would be like I'd rather bring that up early, right? For so many people, that would be like "You're an asshole, I'm leaving." So point of that is, I sort of like being generally less agreeable in some respects if I know I'm not trying to be mean and I'm not trying to hurt someone. Matters. If I'm just being blunt on something and that makes you uncomfortable and it hurts a little, but we need to confront it. Mm-hmm. I'm happy to be less agreeable in those situations because I think it matters. But that has helped me sort of cultivate the social circle that I've got, because only a handful of people will endure what I can be like when I get on a subject. So there was a turning point for you after the turning point was you discovered this concept of the lonely chapter.
Yep.
And that sort of helped bring you a lot of peace and comfort and strength in moving through that. Like, okay, this is what I sort of have to go through. This cocoon phase of like, now is where I wrap myself up and I've got work to do and I'm going to come out the other end in the crowd of people in the space that I sort of need to be. I still personally very much feel like I'm in deep in my lonely chapter. This thing that we're doing and a few other things that sort of happened in the last 12 months, it feels like maybe in some elements I'm starting my ascent out, but I'm still very much in it. But you've also sort of said that you went to I think it was a Chris Williamson live event when he was here in Sydney, and that was like another sort of upshoot.
Yeah, that was
what was that like?
That was a kind of a light bulb moment in a sense, because I still feel like in many ways, like you just said, I still feel like I'm very much in it. I haven't made all the kinds of quality connections where I feel like I'm fully out of that yet, because I think it's different levels to it, right? Professionally, yes, I think I'm doing very well. Quality of a lot of my friendships, I'm still kind of I feel like there's a lot lacking there. But that live event was a really, it was very interesting. That event was the thing that made me go, okay, I'm going to start this podcast. Because basically I was sitting in the room before the show started and I'm looking around and you could see that there was a bunch of people scattered around sitting by themselves. And I kind of just took note of these people and I watched as people started to filter in. You could tell these guys were there by themselves, right? And, I looked at how many there were and I was thinking, generally with events like this, like most of the time when I go to stuff like that, I'm going with someone. I go with my brother or someone. The people that, first of all, consume that kind of content, interested enough to go show up to a live event, that there's so many layers that I think those people have to be a pretty specific type of person to do that. Yeah. Generally. For the amount of people that I seen there that were by themselves, surely some of them have had those mutual feelings of, fuck, am I the only person that's going through this kind of struggle? And
how many of them are in their own lonely chapter?
Exactly.
And still taking action.
Yes. Yeah. And how many of them don't even really know that is a thing, that they don't know that that's part of the process. Because the thing with the lonely chapter is there's a massive temptation to go, well, I'm not seeing all the upside. Fuck it, I'll just go back to what I was doing before. I'll just give up on this shit. So that gave me the idea of, I wanted to have a format like this for a long time. I wanted to have a podcast. I've had so many of those, bro, we should start a podcast discussions with people before. But that gave an extra layer. And I think that the thing that has really got me pumped about what we're doing with this is there's an opportunity to help bring those people together and offer them something that can help.
At the very least, a community of like, we're in the same place you are.
Yes.
Maybe a few steps behind, maybe a few steps ahead, and we don't have all the answers, but we're doing the shit anyway.
Yes. Because I don't think that the lonely chapter is not a thing that you can solve, right? It's just a thing that you've got to go through. Yeah. So I don't think best case scenario for this is we build something that gets people out of it instantly, but it makes the process easier.
Yeah.
Right? It shows them that there is a light on the end of that tunnel.
Even if, we just an idea off the top of my head, it becomes like a Discord group or something where these people can join and be like, this is my experience, and people are like, hey, I'm going through the same thing. Like, it can be a form of networking. Yep. That's what we live. Part of me is annoyed that it's sort of online, but we need more community. 100%. Even if it was like networking, social / business. A lot of the business networking events I don't like. They feel very transactional, but something where it's like we are all a team moving towards our potential.
I think that's just a better long-term view of things. Something that you said in the last episode that I really liked was approaching things from the perspective of giving, right? So you just give as much value as you can because in turn that makes you more valuable, right? The thing that I think about with even this podcast and what this could become is if there was a resource like what I'm picturing this could be back when I was 18, 19, fuck, that would have been, so that's part of my motivation for this. I'm just creating the thing that I wish was there at that period for me. Because I don't think
we need to keep that front of mind too to help with the next couple of videos podcasts we make. Keep it real. Like we are talking to our 19-year-old selves. Yeah, that would be 100%. A fascinating conversation.
Oh yeah.
Like, what would I say to young and me? I like that.
I look around at a lot of guys that are my age now, and I feel like they haven't changed that much since they were 18, 19. And I think you can almost split people into two groups of the people that go through life that don't change very much to the people that actively look at how to improve and change. Yeah. I think if you're at that age and you're very conscious of wanting more and wanting to change and improve, you're very different to the majority. And that feeling of being different sucks at that age because of just the way your brain is. The comparison sucks. So I really want to. I don't think that my experience was exactly unique in the fact that I was some special case of, you know, I was this really deep introspective guy who was going through this unique thing. There'd be heaps of other people out there like that. That was the realization that I got at that live event, seeing that. And I'm like, there's got to be heaps of these people out there, these guys specifically, who, if they just had that knowledge that there are other people going through it, massive help.
And that's a good segue to, we have settled on a name.
Yes.
Which I marinated on, but I've come around to it. So we are calling this The Others podcast.
Yeah.
Can you sort of explain, because I think it's a natural flow on from what you were just saying, why that name resonates, why that name for you encapsulates what we're trying to do here?
What I'll do, to give some context, I'll insert the clip of, surprise, surprise, Chris Williamson reading the quote that inspired this.
Find the others. Admit it, you aren't like them. You're not even close. You may occasionally dress yourself up as one of them, watch the same mindless television shows as they do, maybe even eat the same fast food sometimes. But it seems that the more you try to fit in, the more you feel like an outsider. Watching normal people as they go about their automatic existences. For every time you say club passwords like "have a nice day" and "weather's awful today, eh?" you yearn inside to say forbidden things like "tell me something that makes you cry" or "what do you think deja vu is for?" Face it, you even want to talk to that girl in the elevator. But what if that girl in the elevator and the balding man who walks past your cubicle at work are thinking the same thing? Who knows what you might learn from taking a chance on a conversation with a stranger? Everybody carries a piece of the puzzle. Nobody comes into your life by mere coincidence. Trust your instincts, do the unexpected, find the others.
That quote, so I'd heard of I'd seen the clip before and it didn't mean anything. I just sort of scrolled past it. Went to the live event, had this sort of realization that there's these other guys that are potentially going through this thing. The quote came up again in my feed and it was another one of those, oh fuck, okay. If you're in that phase of, you know, this lonely chapter thing, you feel so isolated, alone, there's that temptation to just say, fuck it, I'm going to go back to what I was before.
Yeah.
But that quote made me go, holy shit. It's the exact way that people feel, you know, you feel like you're this special case, this unique thing that just no one understands me, right? But there are other people that are actively going through that. And I think one of the things we talked about when I initially sort of suggested this as a name is not making it feel like some pretentious sort of, you know, you're viewing yourself as this really unique, special snowflake kind of. I don't think it's that at all. And this is something that we've got to be careful with how we present things to keep that there.
Yeah.
But it's just, you don't see yourself as average, as the person that's going through the average experience of life. I walk around the street and most people out there, it's just by definition, they're average, right? I want to get more out of what I'm doing, and this I think is for the people that think the same. You just want more out of whatever you're experiencing. Again, doesn't have to mean that you want to become a billionaire, or what. It just means you just want to get the most out of whatever it is that you're passionate about. Being a dad, a partner, a brother, whatever it is. It's just about the people that want more.
Yeah, that's something I've thought about, because a lot of my lived experience has been feeling on the outside. Getting diagnosed sort of helped explain elements of that. But it can turn into a prideful thing. And I've seen this in a lot of like mental health communities, which is just a form, I think, of the brain defending and comforting itself. Like, I am different. That's why I struggle with XYZ with all these people and things. But because I'm different, I'm also special.
Yeah.
And there almost becomes a sense of entitlement. Like, especially through the accusation of being misunderstood, which I do empathize with, because everything I'm saying now I'm probably still a little bit of a hypocrite on. But it can so quickly become this arrogance that actually works against you and keeps you stuck because you keep justifying everything. So my thing is like, okay, I chronically feel different to most people in how I think, in how I look at the world, and how I process. Like I was having a conversation with a friend last night, and she and I were talking about, and she was like, I would sooner go for astrology than religion. I'm like, oh, I would go to religion in a heartbeat well before astrology. And she's like, astrology is rooted in science. I'm like, no, it's not. And we went back and forth. And she was like, why would you go for religion? And I start going through, because I think truth is something that's worth being pursued. I think religion more than astrology, like you've got to decide. I'm not all religion is great. You got to pick, but there is religion is part of man's attempt to uncover the truth from a more theological, philosophical route. But I don't think you can exclude those elements when factoring in the conclusions you come to. You can't come at it from just a physical, what we can see, taste, and touch. Anyway, I went through this whole like spiel, and she starts talking about, we've got intuition, and intuition is really powerful. I'm like, well, define what intuition is. Like, where does it come from? And she's like, oh, it's from our gut, it's from our inner, da da da. I'm like, so it comes from your brain, and it's a chemical reaction. Is it a chemical reaction, electrical impulses that are outside of your control, or is it like ultimately it comes down to cells and what is this? And this is sort of just how my head is. It doesn't sound as particularly deep, but so many people just sort of stop at one level, and I just keep wanting to peel it back. Point is, I've always sort of felt a little bit different, and at times that has become a form of arrogance, but then I stay stuck. So for me, the measuring stick is, if you are different, and if that is going to be to your benefit, not to lord it over other people, but if it is going to be to your benefit, it's going to express itself in what you do. Yeah. So if you're different and there is a benefit to that, you feel like because I am glad that my experience has been that I feel very different to a lot of people. If you're glad about it, it means there must be an upside. Yeah. So that upside better be actually providing an upside for you. Yeah. And then I have this, part of my lonely chapter is this wonderful conversation with myself of like, the areas that make you different, you don't actually use them to make your life better. They cause more problems than they solve because of how you use it. Which leads me to a whole discussion around, I think a lot of people's best qualities and worst qualities are often two sides of the same coin. Yeah. In how they manifest. Yeah. So someone who's incredibly impatient probably has the capacity to be somewhat creative and a very efficient worker, because they're like, if I'm going to commit to an action, I just want it done. Yeah. So there can be a real upside to being patient. Hormozy will talk about things like lazy people are often great because lazy people want to figure out how to get this thing done with as minimal effort as possible, which is human beings 101, which is great. But it's how it's applied. So that's where I direct the conversation with myself when I think, okay, I do feel different. It is a belief that I still have. It used to be an arrogance thing of like, I'm different, therefore I'm special. Now it's like, just by way of assessment, I do think I'm different to the vast majority of people. Instead of comparing and worrying about other people, how am I using that difference to better myself and better my own life and circumstances? That shift has been huge for me as part of this cocoon, lonely chapter phase for me. Because I think look, in a second, let's dive into advice. Or if we were going to impart any advice, mine would be, the biggest one I would give is like, leverage your lonely chapter to be as productive as possible on just getting familiar with yourself, building that self-awareness and learning how to sort of talk to yourself. I think for me, because of how I probably find it hard to do meditation like properly, like switch off. It's something I'm sort of trying to practice, to just think on nothing and give my brain a break. But use the phase that you're in to understand yourself and have better conversations with you, like, because you can shape yourself through that. I have, at least. It's really helped me to sort of have these conversations with myself. And so that's part of the growth. So when you slowly become exposed to the people that you look up to, the new circle you sort of want to be around, and you're heading, you can actually see yourself stepping into the direction that you were once shooting for.
Yeah.
And I'm entering that stage now. I'm starting to encounter people in my business and my life. I'm starting to actually step into like reality, into what I was envisioning 2 years ago. Where I'm like, if I stay on this path, that's where I want to get to. And I can see myself stepping into it now in reality.
Yeah.
Which is really, really cool. But that's, I think, how you use the lonely chapter. One element, you use it really well. It's painful. But yeah, use it to do a lot of the self-work. So yeah, when you enter those circles, you're more ready for it. You're already a different version.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So, lonely chapter, common, to be expected, normal. It's okay to let go of people and things. We said this in positioning, I think. It's okay to let go of people and things as you move through the process of growth. But it is better for people to be part of a community than to be doing things alone. So when you do have time on your own, that's time for you to do a lot of self-work, with the goal being, I'm going to come out of this and it won't be lonely anymore because I'm going to find people that are on the same page as I am. And that's just a fact of life.
Yes. It's a process that you can't avoid, but you can, I think, shorten it, or at least make it less painful by...
Make it more productive.
Make it more productive by just doing the right things.
Yeah. Don't spend your lonely chapter playing video games. You will extend the lonely chapter exponentially.
Yes.
Anyway, this has been awesome. Thanks, dude.
Thanks for this, man.